Pre-trip 2 vials, each containing a solution of 10 mg of 2CT-2 in water were prepared. My primary intent for this trip was to test out this batch of 2CT2. I had used 2CT-2 available from Dutch smart shops on quite a few occasions, and considered 2CT-2 one of my favorite psychedelics. I have tried 2CT7 twice as well, and my preliminary opinion is that I prefer 2CT2, which I know is certainly a minority view. Anyhow, this particular 2CT-2 came from an American-based internet chemical supplier, and I wanted to give the material a trial run at a low dose for quality testing before jumping in with a full-size dose. I also have not been using entheogens as much in the past few months as I normally do. Although throughout my career I have periodically gone through phases of up to 8 months of no entheogen use at all. Lately, I had been feeling I'd reached a stalled point in my life, not really getting anywhere new. I'd felt a little distant from my friends, not been very motivated about work, and a recent on-again off-again situation with a girl had me questioning the future of my romantic life. 2CT-2 has in the past been a very therapeutic substance for me, and I was hoping that it would once again help me open up whatever blockage had been plaguing me lately and help me to work through the issues towards a more positive life situation. Other than a couple berries in the early afternoon, I had fasted all day, as I find an empty stomach will generally prevent any nausea with phenethylamines, as well as promoting a better state of mind for entheogenic experiences in general. I had a typical case of pre-trip jitters, perhaps slightly more so than normal due to the fact that this was untested material, for me, at least, and that it had been 4 months since my last trip. Other than that though I was feeling enthusiastic to be working with 2CT-2 again. 10:20 p.m. the first dose was taken. A barely perceptible chemical taste, but overall not really noticeable. Had I diluted it with juice, I doubt I would have tasted it at all. Immediately following consumption, much of my pre-trip jitters vanished, and I started to get excited knowing I was on my way. After the trip, I noticed that I did not in fact finish all of the solution. I estimate that I only had 7 or 8 milligrams. I should point out that in my experiences with the Dutch material, I used dosages between 16 and 24 milligrams, with 18 to 20 being my preferred range for most occasions. 10:45 p.m. After trying formal meditation for a few minutes and not being really able to focus enough to relax fully, I decided to go lay in my bed with the lights off and just mellow out. I soon began to notice myself feeling very cozy and comfortably warm. Probably more than could be accounted for by relaxing or any cannabis I smoked. My body definitely tells me that the drugs are beginning to do something. I've been thinking over things that have been on my mind lately, and am feeling fairly positive. Much more so than I did earlier. Almost all of my pre-trip jitters have vanished now, and after taking time to record some notes, I found myself wanting to go back and lie down some more and to continue drifting in thought. 11 p.m. Still in a nice place. At this point I began thinking of drinking the rest of the 2CT-2 solution, and planned to do so at 11:30 p.m. 11:45 p.m. Got lost in thought, didn't take the supplemental dose at the planned time. By the time I remembered, I noticed I was beginning to get a headache. I checked my blood pressure and was surprised to find it at 157/91, with a pulse of 96, which is much higher than I would like. My normal resting blood pressure is around 120/78. I didn't feel anxious at all at this point, but I figured it must be some residual subconscious anxiety or something, as 2CT-2 has never had this effect on me in the past. If anything, it has generally put me in a very relaxed, calm state. I decided to try drinking some juice for electrolytes and to relax for a little while to see if that dropped my blood pressure some, before taking any more of the drug. Other than the high blood pressure, I felt pretty good at this point. The only other remotely negative things I was feeling were some mild muscular tension in my neck, which I always get from psychedelics, and my stomach was letting me know it wanted food. I had some very mild visual effects at this point, color enhancement mostly, and a warm cozy feeling throughout my body. I was still eager to take more and to use this trip for some needed self-psychotherapy. 11:55 p.m. Blood pressure down to 146/87 and pulse down to 91. I felt somewhat hot. 1:05 a.m. The hot sensation had gone away, and I felt somewhat cool. Blood pressure dropped to 139/80 and pulse to 79. All the same, I decided not to take the supplement, partly out of concern over this anomalous blood pressure spike, and partly because it had been almost 2 hours since the original dose, well past optimal boosting time. 2:56 a.m. blood pressure at 141/87, pulse at 89. Despite drinking lots of potassium-rich juice, and the lack of any mental anxiety or panic effects, my blood pressure and pulse remained somewhat high for most of the peak effects, which lasted from around 1 a.m. until 3 a.m. This was accompanied by an undefinable feeling of, something is different than the other times I've had T2. Although this definitely felt like 2CT2, it was as if there was something else as well. A stimulant edge which I'd never gotten from T2 before. The other thing which struck me as odd was the strength of the trip. Although I never got any visual effects beyond some color enhancement, I was at a strong +2 as far as physical and mental effects. In my past experiences with T2, anything under 10 mg would have resulted in at most a +1. I had by this time noticed the liquid remaining in the vial and realized I'd only had 7 to 8 mg. I am still perplexed by the strength of the effects I got. Regarding the physical effects, one thing that seemed noticeably absent was the nice warm glowing sensation in my solar plexus that 2CT-2 and 2CT7 both normally give, though I suspect this absence is dosage related. Other than these anomalous results, though, I had a fairly good trip. Once the initial blood pressure spike and accompanying headache passed, well, I did get occasional mild headaches, but none like the initial one I got when my systolic was around 160. I managed to work through many of the issues which had been on my mind lately and come to satisfying conclusions. At around 2:30, I looked in the mirror and noticed that I looked 5 years younger, an effect that has persisted for a week now. Finding myself beginning to come down some, I smoked a little cannabis at this point to unwind. 3:41 a.m. At this point I found myself as close to baseline as possible without sleeping. I find myself in the kitchen eating small helpings of everything in sight, a typical phenethylamine effect for me. Once past the initial peak, I always find myself ravenously hungry, both for calories and for the amazing enhancement of taste sensations that phenethylamines give. 3:50 a.m. I had a pre-made cup of kava brew in the refrigerator, and decided this would be a great time to drink it. It added a great relaxing aspect to the tail end of the trip. 4:10 a.m. Out of curiosity, I decided to check my blood pressure again. I found it to be 112/79, yet despite feeling very relaxed, my pulse was at 106. Strange. Post-trip I ended up going to sleep around 5 a.m. The next day when I awoke, I found myself with a slight hangover, which was somewhat odd. Every other time I'd done 2CT2, I felt a very positive glowing feeling the next day. This time, I felt somewhat tired and drained for most of the day. However, I suspect that this is due to simply not getting enough sleep, as a nap in the afternoon fixed me up entirely. I've spent the past week wondering how to account for some of the unusual effects I got from this trip versus my other T2 experiences. One possibility is that I had some sort of subconscious anxiety, despite the fact that I felt so positive. In support of this, I know of one other person who has used T2 from this supplier who didn't report any unusual reactions. On the other hand, there is the possibility that this T2 may have had some kind of impurity which may have altered the effects somewhat. In support of this alternative is the feeling I had throughout the trip of something being subtly different, and the fact that I didn't feel anxious but that my pulse and blood pressure remained high for so long regardless. A 106 pulse after a large dose of kava is unusual in itself. It should be noted that the person who had also used this batch of T2 had never used the Dutch material and so is unable to compare the two for any differences. In addition, the material has a very strong odor which I can only describe in meaningless terms like chemical and solventy. I have no other 2CT-2 to do a smell comparison on, and the Dutch material I had came in tablets which had no odor. However, I have smelled two separate batches of the chemically similar 2CT7 and neither had a smell as strong as this. One other remote possibility that crossed my mind. I took some opiates the night before this trip for a toothache. I don't see how this would in any way affect a phenethylamine taken the next day, however, and I have read of people mixing opiates and phenethylamines before with no unusual results. This was definitely atypical of my experiences with 2CT-2 in many regards. I will need to investigate further to see if the odd results were due to impure material, or were psychosomatic, or caused by something else entirely.